When a racist coffee shop owner kicks out a Mexican, he has no idea who's watching, and what happens next will shock everyone. The first time Raul Gutierrez noticed the abandoned lighthouse, he was running from a thunderstorm. At 76, he had fled his life in Mexico City to the small coastal town of San Robledo, Texas, where nobody knew his name or the weight he carried. The lighthouse stood on a rocky outcrop, its white paint peeling like old scars, a broken sentinel against the darkening sky. Rain had soaked through his thin jacket by the time he reached the boarded-up door. A loose plank yielded to his desperate push, and he slipped inside, the musty darkness enveloping him like an old coat. The circular room was empty except for dust and memories. As lightning flashed through the cracked windows, illuminating the spiral staircase that wound upward, Raul felt something he hadn't in months: curiosity. He'd come to San Robledo to disappear, not to find anything. After 40 years as a respected photographer, documenting the struggles of working-class people, while carefully avoiding his own, the Mexico City earthquake had changed everything. The National Journalism Prize Committee had called his photograph of the disaster haunting, a young father reaching across the broken concrete toward his daughter, their fingertips almost touching across an impossible chasm. What the committee didn't know was that Raul had set his camera down after taking the shot. He could have reached them both. Instead, he had captured their final moment. The thunder shook the lighthouse, and Raul sank to the floor, his back against the cold stone wall. This forgotten place seemed fitting. He too was a shell of something that once guided others home. "You're trespassing," a voice growled from the shadows. Raul's heart lurched as a tall figure materialized from the staircase. In the dim light, he made out a weathered face, late 50s perhaps, with eyes the color of the stormy sea outside. He wore a faded navy sweater with patches at the elbows and carried an old lantern that cast dancing shadows across his stern features. "I'm sorry," Raul stammered. "The storm... Everyone in town knows this place is off limits." His voice was rough, like it had been scraped against the same rocks that surrounded the lighthouse. "I'm not from town," Raul replied, standing up slowly. "I'm just passing through." The man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Nobody just passes through San Robledo. We're 30 miles from the nearest highway." He raised his lantern, studying Raul's dripping form. "You're that man who bought the old Wilkins cottage." It wasn't a question. In a town of barely 2,000 souls, a newcomer couldn't stay anonymous for long. "Raul Gutierrez," he offered, though he hadn't planned on introducing himself to anyone. "Miguel Ramirez," he responded after a long pause. "Most people call me Toro. I'm the caretaker." His eyes narrowed. "What were you running from, Mr. Gutierrez? The storm, or something else?" The question hit too close to home, and Raul felt his defenses rise. "I should go." As he moved toward the door, Miguel stepped aside but spoke again. "The lighthouse keeper's journal is missing. If you took it..." "I just got here," Raul protested, genuine surprise in his voice. Miguel studied his face for a moment, then nodded curtly. "The storm's passing. You should be able to make it back to town." As Raul slipped back into the rain, now reduced to a gentle patter, he felt Miguel's eyes on his back. He couldn't shake the feeling that in the span of 10 minutes, this stranger had somehow seen more of him than colleagues had in years. What Raul didn't realize as he made his way down the rocky path was that his search for invisibility had led him to the one place where the past refused to stay buried, and to a man who recognized the shadows in his eyes because they matched his own. The Wilkins cottage sat on the edge of town, its weathered blue clapboards and white trim a testament to Texas stubbornness. Raul had chosen it precisely because it faced away from the Gulf, its small windows overlooking a dense mesquite forest instead. He couldn't bear to look at water anymore, not after the earthquake. For 3 weeks he had managed to avoid most human contact, venturing into town only for necessities. The elderly shopkeeper at the general store, Mrs. Winters, had given up trying to engage him in conversation, settling instead for sympathetic smiles as she rang up Raul's purchases. But San Robledo was persistent in its small-town ways, and isolation proved harder than Raul had anticipated. The knock on his door came early on a Saturday morning. Raul opened it to find a young woman with copper hair pulled into a messy, Bun, holding a wicker basket and grinning with unnerving enthusiasm. "Welcome, wagon," the woman announced. "I'm Emily Cooper, town librarian and self-appointed newcomer. Committee. I brought tamales and local gossip, both homemade and equally delicious." Raoul hesitated, his hand still on the door. "That's thoughtful, but 3 weeks is my limit," Emily interrupted. "I give everyone 3 weeks of brooding, solitude before I intervene. It's in the town charter. Page 42, subsection B. No sulking for longer than 21 days. Despite himself, Raoul felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Is it really?" "No, but it should be." Emily thrust the basket forward. "Tamales made by my abuela's recipe. You can return the basket whenever, preferably filled with your life story and why you're hiding in Wilkins Cottage." The directness caught Raoul off guard. "I'm not hiding." Emily's green eyes softened. "Honey, this town has 7 bed and breakfasts with ocean views, and you picked the only rental property that faces the forest. You're hiding." Raoul accepted the basket, if only to end the conversation. "Thank you for the tamales." "You're very welcome." Emily started to turn, then paused. "Oh, I almost forgot. The Historical Society is meeting Thursday evening at the library. We're discussing the lighthouse restoration project." Her expression turned sly. "Toro mentioned you've already had a tour." Heat crept up Raoul's neck. "It wasn't a tour. I got caught in the rain." Emily hummed, clearly unconvinced. "Well, he doesn't usually let anyone near that place. Must have seen something special in you." Before Raoul could protest, Emily bounced down the steps, calling over her shoulder, "Thursday, 7 o'clock. There'll be wine." Raoul closed the door and leaned against it, the basket heavy in his hands. The town was already wrapping its tendrils around him, and he wasn't sure if he was being embraced or ensnared. The tamales, however, were excellent. It took 3 days for curiosity to overcome Raoul's resolve to remain uninvolved. He found himself wandering the quiet stacks of San Robledo's library, a converted Victorian mansion whose grandeur seemed at odds with the small fishing community it served. "Can I help you find something?" Emily appeared at his elbow, her presence as sudden as if she'd materialized from between the books. Raoul startled. "I was just looking." "For anything in particular? True crime? Romance? The secret history of lighthouses along the Texas coast?" Emily waggled her eyebrows at the last suggestion. Raoul sighed. "Is everyone in this town so nosy, persistent, charming?" Emily supplied. "Yes, yes, and absolutely yes. Small town. Big curiosity. It's our defining feature." She leaned against the bookshelf. "So why the sudden interest in our humble library?" "I used to be a photographer," Raoul admitted, surprising himself. "Photojournalist, actually. I thought maybe I'd research local history for a personal project." It wasn't entirely a lie. Since the encounter at the lighthouse, Raoul had been plagued by restless energy. Perhaps documenting something, anything, would help quiet his mind. Emily's face lit. "Bess, you've come to the right place. Our local history section is small but mighty." She led Raoul to a corner where several glass-fronted bookcases housed leather-bound volumes and archival boxes. San Robledo was founded in 1832, primarily as a fishing and shipbuilding community. The lighthouse was built in 1886 after several tragic shipwrecks. "And Miguel, how long has he been the caretaker?" Raoul asked, trying to sound casual. Emily gave him a knowing look. "Miguel Toro Ramirez is our town mystery. Showed up about 15 years ago, right after the lighthouse was decommissioned. Convinced the Historical Society to let him live in the keeper's cottage and maintain the property." She lowered her voice. "There are theories, of course. Some say he lost his family at sea. Others think he's running from the law. My personal favorite is that he's actually a famous biker who left his gang to find peace. Or maybe he just likes lighthouses," Raoul suggested dryly. Emily laughed. "Where's the romance in that? Anyway, he's been looking for the missing keeper's journal for years. It supposedly contains the truth about the Sanchez tragedy." "The Sanchez tragedy? Now I've got you hooked." Emily pulled a thin volume from the shelf. In 1888, the lighthouse keeper Carlos Sanchez, his wife Maria, and their young daughter Sofia all disappeared during a winter storm. The only clue was a message scrawled on the lighthouse wall: "The shadows are hungry." The replacement keeper documented everything in his journal, but the journal vanished in the 1970s. Raúl felt a chill despite the library's warmth. That's unsettling. San Robledo thrives on unsettling. It's good for tourism, Emily winked. Now, are you coming to the meeting on Thursday? Toro will be there, and he rarely shows his face at town functions. The invitation hung between them, and Raúl found himself nodding before he could reconsider. I might stop by. Thursday evening found Raúl perched uncomfortably on a wooden chair in the library's meeting room, nursing a plastic cup of surprisingly decent wine. Around him, about 20 townspeople chatted amicably, occasionally casting curious glances his way. Emily flitted between groups, her role as social connector evident in her easy manner. Miguel arrived last, his entrance causing a subtle shift in the room's energy. He wore a dark button-down shirt that looked freshly pressed, though his hair remained untamed, silver strands catching the light as he nodded greetings to various attendees. When his eyes found Raúl's, he saw momentary surprise, followed by something unreadable. "Told you he'd be here," Emily whispered, suddenly beside him. "And he cleaned up. He must have known you were coming." "Don't be ridiculous," Raúl muttered, though he couldn't help but notice how the shirt brought out the intensity in Miguel's storm-colored eyes. The meeting began with discussions of fundraising efforts and restoration plans. Raúl found himself genuinely interested in the detailed history of the lighthouse's construction and significance to the community. When Miguel stood to present his caretaker's report, his deep voice commanded attention without effort. "The south wall needs immediate reinforcement before winter," he explained, pointing to photographs projected on a screen. "And we've had more vandalism, mostly teenagers carving initials, but someone broke into the lantern room last week." "Any sign of the journal?" asked an elderly man in the front row. Miguel's expression tightened. "No, Mr. Holloway. No sign of it." 15 years of searching," someone murmured. "Maybe it's time to let that ghost rest." "The journal isn't about ghosts," Miguel replied, an edge to his voice. "It's about truth. San Robledo's history deserves to be preserved accurately." As the meeting concluded, Raúl found himself lingering, watching as Miguel gathered his materials. When the room had nearly emptied, he approached him. "The lighthouse seems important to you," he observed, "beyond just maintenance." Miguel looked up, those penetrating eyes assessing him. "Places hold memories, Mr. Gutierrez. Sometimes they're all we have left." "Raúl," he corrected, "and yes, I understand that better than most." Something in his tone must have registered, because Miguel's expression softened slightly. "You're still here in San Robledo. I thought you were just passing through." "So did I," Raúl admitted. "Plans change." "Do they?" There was a challenge in his question, as if he knew exactly what Raúl was running from. Before he could respond, Emily bounded over. "Toro, you simply must see Raúl's work. He's being modest, but I Googled him. He's won awards. His photographs are incredible." Emily turned to Raúl. "You could document the lighthouse restoration. We need someone with your eye." Raúl felt his throat constrict. I haven't picked up a camera in months." Miguel studied him, and he had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing the story behind his words. "Sometimes we need to face what scares us," he said quietly. "And sometimes we need to know when to walk away," Raúl countered, his voice sharper than intended. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. Miguel nodded once, gathered his papers, and moved toward the door. "Good night, Emily, Mr. Gutierrez." As he left, Emily sighed dramatically. "Well, that was charged with something. Want to tell me what that was about?" Raúl shook his head. "It was nothing. Just two people who recognize when someone else is running away." The following morning, Raúl woke to find a small worn book on his porch step. No note, no explanation, just the book, its leather cover cracked with age. Inside, a handwritten inscription read, "Property of Tomás Ramirez, Lighthouse Keeper, 1889-1904. His heart quickened. This wasn't the missing Sanchez journal, but it was a keeper's log nonetheless, one that began just after the Sanchez family's disappearance, and the surname wasn't lost on him. Ramirez, like Miguel. Raul spent the day poring over the faded entries, discovering the meticulous records of weather conditions, ship sightings, and maintenance tasks. But scattered throughout were more personal observations. Deck 18, 1889. The scratching behind the walls continues. Maria Sanchez's ghost, the townspeople say. I tell them it's only mice, but in the night I wonder. Jan 3, 1890. Found another carving today. Same message as was reportedly left by Sanchez. The shadows are hungry. Someone in town playing pranks, no doubt. I've secured all entrances. Feb 15, 1890. Dreams of drowning again. The sea calls to me in a woman's voice. My predecessor heard it too, they say, before he vanished with his family. By evening, Raul knew he had to return to the lighthouse. Whether Miguel had left the book as an invitation or a warning, he couldn't stay away. Some stories demanded to be uncovered, even by those who had sworn to stop looking. The path to the lighthouse was more treacherous in the fading light. Raul picked his way carefully over the rocks, Tomas Ramirez's journal tucked securely in his jacket pocket. The keeper's cottage, Miguel's home, showed a single light in the window, but Raul bypassed it, heading straight for the lighthouse itself. The loose board was still there, offering entry just as it had during the storm. Inside, the circular room felt different in the twilight, less a shelter, more a threshold to something unknown. Raul pulled out his phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the spiral staircase. As he ascended, each step creaking beneath his weight, Raul felt a strange duality. Fear and anticipation wound together like twin strands of a rope. At the top, the lantern room spread before him, its glass panels showcasing a 360-degree view of the darkening sea and coastline. San Robledo's lights twinkled in the distance, small beacons of humanity against the encroaching night. I wondered if you'd come. Raul whirled around to find Miguel standing in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the stairs. In his hands, he held an old lantern, its light casting long shadows across the room, just as he had when they first met. You left the journal, Raul said, not a question. Tomas Ramirez was my great-grandfather, Miguel confirmed. His journal has been passed down through generations. It isn't the one everyone's looking for, but it tells part of the story, Raul finished. He pulled the journal from his pocket. He was afraid of something here, something to do with the Sanchez family's disappearance. Miguel moved into the room, setting the lantern on the floor between them. My family has been connected to this lighthouse for over a century. I grew up hearing stories about Carlos Sanchez and the shadows that took him and his family. His voice was low, intimate in the enclosed space. Most people think it's just local folklore, but my great-grandfather believed something really happened here. Why show me? Raul asked. You don't know anything about me. Miguel's eyes caught the lantern light. I know enough. I recognized, at the moment I saw you, the look of someone haunted by what they've witnessed. He paused. Emily may have mentioned you were a photojournalist. I looked up your work. Raul felt exposed, vulnerable. So you know about the earthquake. I know you won a national prize for capturing other people's tragedy and then disappeared from the photography world entirely. His words weren't accusatory, just matter of fact. What I don't know is why. The question hung between them, and Raul found himself wanting to answer, needing to answer in a way he hadn't since the accident. I was there, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not just as a photographer. I was there and I could have helped instead of taking pictures. A man and his daughter. He swallowed hard. They died while I was framing the perfect shot. Miguel was silent for a long moment. And you've been punishing yourself ever since? Wouldn't you? The question escaped before Raul could stop it. Yes, he admitted. I would. Is that why you're here? Punishing yourself for something? Miguel turned toward the windows, gazing out at the darkened sea. My wife and son died in a boating accident 15 years ago. I was supposed to be with them, but I stayed behind to finish a work project. His voice remained steady, but Raoul saw the tension in his shoulders. I've spent every day since, wondering if I could have saved them if I'd been there. So you came to a lighthouse, Raoul said softly, to guide others home safely when you couldn't do the same for your family. Miguel turned back to him, surprise evident in his expression. Most people don't understand that part. I understand living with ghosts, Raoul replied. For the first time since they'd met, Miguel smiled, a small sad thing that transformed his face. Then you understand why finding the Sanchez journal matters to me. Some mysteries need solving, even if only to put the ghosts to rest. As they stood there, two broken men in a forgotten lighthouse, Raoul felt a shift inside him, like a camera, lens finally finding its focus. Perhaps he had come to San Robledo not to disappear, but to be found. I'll help you, he heard himself say. I'll help you look for the journal. Summer faded into autumn, and Raoul's temporary stay in San Robledo stretched into something more permanent. The search for the missing Sanchez journal became a shared obsession, drawing him and Miguel into a partnership neither had expected. Together they scoured historical records, interviewed elderly residents, and spent countless hours in the lighthouse, looking for hidden compartments or overlooked clues. Their search yielded unexpected results, not the journal itself, but a gradual thawing of the barriers each had built around their wounded hearts. Miguel's gruff exterior softened in Raoul's presence, while Raoul found himself picking up his camera again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as he documented the lighthouse restoration efforts. You've changed, Emily observed one afternoon as they sorted through donated items for the Historical Society's fundraising auction. You smile now, occasionally. Don't spread rumors about me, Raoul replied dryly, but there was truth in Emily's words. The weight he carried hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted somehow, becoming more bearable. It's Toro, isn't it? Emily pressed. You two and your mysterious journal hunt. The whole town's talking. The whole town needs better hobbies. Oh, please, Emily scoffed. This is the most excitement we've had since old Mayor Winters got stuck in the lobster trap last 4th of July. She paused her sorting. Seriously though, Raoul, whatever's happening between you two, it's good. You both deserve something good. Raoul couldn't argue with that, though he wasn't sure how to define what was happening between him and Miguel. Their connection had grown in quiet moments, passing a thermos of coffee back and forth as they pored over documents, walking the shoreline at dawn as Miguel shared stories of the lighthouse's history, sitting in comfortable silence as the day's light faded. They never spoke directly of their losses, but understanding flowed beneath their conversations like an underground river. In Miguel's presence, Raoul felt seen in a way that was both terrifying and liberating. The breakthrough came on a blustery October evening as the first real storm of the season approached. Raoul had joined Miguel at the keeper's cottage to review their findings before the weather made the path to the lighthouse impassable. Maps and photocopied documents covered every surface of Miguel's small living room. The cottage was sparsely furnished but unexpectedly cozy, with worn leather armchairs and bookshelves built into every available wall space. A driftwood fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering light over their work. We've been approaching this all wrong, Miguel said suddenly, looking up from an architectural drawing of the lighthouse. We've been searching for where someone might have hidden the journal, but we never considered who might have taken it in the first place. Raoul set down his mug of tea. The journal disappeared in the 1970s, according to the Historical Society records. Who had access to the lighthouse then? That's just it. Everyone. Before it was decommissioned, this was a tourist attraction. School groups, summer visitors, local teenagers looking for a place to. He cleared his throat. Well, you get the idea. So anyone could have taken it, Raoul concluded, disappointed. Not necessarily. Miguel pulled out a visitor logbook, its pages yellow with age. The lighthouse keeper in the 1970s was Joseph Wilkins. He kept meticulous records of everyone who visited. Wilkins, Raoul's mind raced. As in my cottage? Miguel nodded. His family owned several properties in town. After he died, his son Tom maintained them as rentals. Tom Wilkins, Raoul breathed. The real estate agent mentioned him when I signed the lease. She said Tom had passed away last winter. Their eyes met across the cluttered table, the same realization dawning. Tom, Miguel repeated. The son of the last keeper. Outside, the wind howled as the storm made landfall. Rain lashed against the windows as Miguel and Raoul hurried toward his car. We might be wrong, Raoul cautioned as they drove through the darkening streets. It could be coincidence. San. Robledo doesn't believe in coincidences, Miguel replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Neither do I, not anymore. The Wilkins cottage loomed before them, its windows dark against the stormy sky. Inside, Raoul flipped on lights as Miguel scanned the living room. If Tom Wilkins had the journal, where would he keep it? A safe? A hiding place? Raoul considered the cottage's layout. There's a built-in cabinet in the hallway that's always been locked. I assumed it was the owner's private storage. The cabinet in question was a simple wooden structure between the bedroom and bathroom. Its brass lock was old but sturdy. Miguel examined it closely. Do you have tools? He asked. In the kitchen drawer, but should we really be breaking into... A tremendous crack of thunder interrupted him, followed by the distinct sound of breaking glass from the back of the house. They froze, listening as the wind whistled through what must be a broken window. I'll check it, Miguel said, moving toward the sound. Raoul followed, his heart pounding. The kitchen window had shattered, shards of glass scattered across the floor as rain poured in. Miguel quickly moved to cover the opening with a trash bag and duct tape from a drawer Raoul directed him. So as they worked to secure the makeshift cover, Raoul noticed something gleaming among the broken glass, a small brass key apparently dislodged from the window frame by the breaking glass. Miguel, he called, pointing to the key. Look. His eyes widened as he carefully retrieved it. Hidden in plain sight, he murmured. The key fit the cabinet lock perfectly. Inside, they found a stack of photo albums, old tax documents, and a small fireproof box. The box wasn't locked as if Tom Wilkins had wanted its contents to be found eventually. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its edges darkened with age. The first page bore a simple inscription, Carlos Sanchez, Lighthouse Keeper, 1885-1888. This is it, Miguel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. After all these years, their fingers brushed as they opened the journal together, and in that moment of discovery, surrounded by the storm's fury, something shifted between them, a connection deeper than their shared quest, a recognition of what it meant to finally confront the shadows of the past. The journal's early entries were mundane, weather reports, supply inventories, notes about lighthouse maintenance, but as they carefully turned the brittle pages, the tone changed. Nov 8, 1887. Maria claims to hear voices in the lighthouse at night. I tell her it's only the wind, but I've heard them too, whispers behind the walls calling out names I don't recognize. Deck 21, 1887. Sophia's nightmares are worsening. She speaks of shadow people who visit her room. Maria wants to leave, but where would we go? This position is all we have. The 1888 found strange markings carved into the lantern room floor today. Not in English, not in Spanish, not in any language I recognize. Maria says they weren't there yesterday. The entries grew increasingly disturbed, describing darkening shadows, unexplained cold spots, and the Sanchez family's deteriorating mental state. The final entry, dated February 4, 1888, sent chills down Raoul's spine. They are no longer content to watch. The shadows have substance now. They touch, they take. Maria says we must leave tonight, but I fear it's too late. They've found us. They know our names, they are hungry, and we... The entry ended mid-sentence, a dark smear across the page like someone had been interrupted while writing. Raoul looked up to find Miguel's face pale in the lamplight. What happened to them? He whispered. I don't know, he admitted, but whatever Carlos Sanchez faced in that lighthouse, whatever he uncovered, someone wanted this journal hidden. As if responding to his words, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the cottage into darkness. Outside, the storm reached its full fury, the wind screaming around the eaves like a living thing. Miguel's hand found Raúl's in the darkness. "We need to get back to town," he said urgently. "This storm is worse than they predicted. The road might flood." Raúl clutched the journal to his chest as they made their way to the front door. When Miguel opened it, they were met with a wall of wind and rain, so fierce it nearly knocked them backward. "We'll never make it driving in this," Raúl shouted over the storm. "We have to wait it out." Miguel nodded grimly, securing the door against the onslaught. In the glow of their phone flashlights, his face looked haunted. "I don't like this," he said, glancing at the journal in Raúl's hands. "Finding it now, during the worst storm in years." "You can't seriously think they're connected," Raúl began, but his words died as a tremendous crash sounded from outside, the distinctive crack of a tree falling. They rushed to the window to see a massive pine had come down across the driveway, completely blocking Raúl's car. "We're trapped," he breathed. Miguel's arm went around his shoulders, a protective gesture that felt both unexpected and completely natural. "Just until morning," he reassured him. "The emergency crews will clear the roads once the storm passes." But as they settled in the living room, building a fire in the small hearth to ward off the growing chill, Raúl couldn't shake the feeling that they had unleashed something by finding the journal, something that had been waiting patiently for decades. The storm raged through the night as they read Carlos Sanchez's journal by firelight, piecing together the story of a man who believed something ancient and malevolent had taken residence in the lighthouse he was charged to maintain. Sanchez described rituals he had performed to protect his family, symbols drawn in salt across thresholds, prayers spoken at dawn and dusk. "He was trying to hold back the darkness," Miguel murmured, his shoulder pressed against Raúl's as they huddled near the fire. "To protect what he loved most." "Do you think he succeeded?" Raúl asked, his voice small against the howling wind. Miguel's hand found his again, his rough palm warm against Raúl's weathered skin. "I think he did. What any of us would do when faced with the impossible. He fought until he couldn't anymore." In the flickering firelight, with the storm raging outside and the weight of Sanchez's final words heavy between them, Raúl saw Miguel clearly for the first time, not as the gruff lighthouse caretaker or the grieving widower, but as a man who had been searching for answers to questions that might never be resolved, just as Raúl had been running from truths he could never escape. "We don't know what happened tomorrow," he said softly. "We only know what we do today." Miguel's eyes met his, understanding flowing between them. "And what are you doing today, Raúl Gutiérrez?" "Stopping," he whispered. "I'm finally stopping running." When Miguel's hands clasped his, it felt like coming home after a long, treacherous journey, unexpected and inevitable all at once. In that moment, with the shadows gathering close and the past breathing down their necks, they chose each other, chose the present over the ghosts that had haunted them for so long. Morning broke clear and brilliant after the storm, sunlight streaming through the cottage windows to reveal the destruction outside. Trees down, branches scattered, the road to town likely impassable for hours yet. Raúl woke on the sofa, Miguel's jacket draped over him and the Sanchez journal clutched to his chest. In the kitchen, he heard the quiet sounds of Miguel moving about, the scent of coffee drifting through the air. The night's revelations, both from the journal and between them, hung in the air, delicate as spiderwebs and just as binding. Raúl placed the journal carefully on the coffee table and made his way to the kitchen. Miguel stood at the window surveying the damage, a mug of coffee in his hand. He turned when Raúl entered, his expression softening in a way that made his heart twist. "Power's still out," he said, offering Raúl a steaming mug. "But the camp stove works for coffee at least." Raúl accepted the mug, their fingers brushing. "Thank you for everything." They stood in comfortable silence, sipping coffee and watching as the first townsfolk ventured out to assess the storm's impact. In the distance, chainsaws began to buzz as the road-clearing efforts began. "What do we do with it?" Raúl finally asked, nodding toward the living room where the journal waited. The Sanchez Journal, it answers some questions but raises so many more. Miguel considered this. We give it to the Historical Society, where it belongs. He met Raúl's eyes. The past should be remembered, Raúl, respected, but not lived in. The wisdom in his words resonated deep within him. For months, Raúl had been trapped in a single moment during the Mexico City earthquake, unable to move forward, unwilling to let go. But standing here in the aftermath of the storm, he felt different, lighter, as if the gale had blown away some of the weight he carried. I've been thinking, he said carefully, about staying in San Robledo permanently. Miguel's expression remained neutral, but his eyes brightened. The town grows on you. It's not just the town, Raúl admitted. The lighthouse restoration project could use a dedicated photographer for the historical record. A smile tugged at the corner of Miguel's mouth. Is that so? Emily suggested it, Raúl continued, finding his courage. But I think it was always supposed to be this way. Me finding this place, you finding that journal. Some stories need to be told, even the difficult ones. Miguel set down his coffee and took a step toward him. And what about our story, Raúl? Gutierrez, is that one worth telling? I think, he said, closing the distance between them, it's one worth living. When Miguel placed a hand on his shoulder, it felt like the lighthouse beam finally finding a ship lost at sea, illumination after too long in darkness. They had both carried their shadows for so long, worn their grief like armor against a world that had taken too much from them. But standing in the sunlight of a new day, Raúl understood that sometimes the weight we carry changes us not by crushing us, but by strengthening us for the journey ahead. Later that day, when the roads had been cleared and they made their way back to town, they took the Sanchez Journal to the Historical Society. Emily was ecstatic, organizing an immediate meeting of the board to authenticate and preserve the precious artifact. This changes everything, she gushed, carefully turning the brittle pages with gloved hands. Not just for the lighthouse restoration, but for San Robledo's history. As news spread through town, Raúl found himself at the center of attention, a position he had once avoided at all costs. But with Miguel by his side, the curious glances and grateful handshakes from townspeople felt less like an intrusion and more like an acceptance. 1 month later, the former Rancho Alegre Cafe reopened under new ownership. Miguel and his biker friends, along with several local business owners, had purchased the property and transformed it into a community gathering place called El Encuentro, the Encounter. On opening day, Raúl was invited as the guest of honor. When he entered, the familiar scent of coffee and fresh tortillas greeted him, but the space itself had been transformed. Where once there had been coldness and exclusion, now warmth and welcome permeated every corner. Photographs lined the walls, Raúl's photographs. The lighthouse in various stages of restoration, the town's fishing boats at dawn, children playing in the plaza. And interspersed among them, historical images of San Robledo's past, including a faded photograph of the Sanchez family standing proudly before their lighthouse. Miguel greeted him with a firm embrace. What do you think? Emily helped me select the photos from your new collection. It's perfect, Raúl said, genuinely moved. A place where past and present meet. As they sat down for breakfast, surrounded by townspeople of all backgrounds, the elderly Mr. Holloway from the Historical Society, Emily chatting animatedly with a group of high school students, at a table of Miguel's biker friends in their leather vests, Raúl felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. Miguel raised his coffee mug. To El Encuentro, he said, where all paths cross. Raúl smiled and raised his own mug. And to finding home when you least expect it. Outside, the lighthouse stood tall against the clear blue sky, its restoration well underway. Soon it would shine again, a beacon calling travelers home. Just as San Robledo had called to Raúl when he was lost, and just as he and Miguel had found each other, two souls who had been running from their shadows, only to discover that in facing them together, the darkness held less power. In the end, Raúl realized, it wasn't about forgetting the past or escaping it. It was about finding the courage to carry it forward, transformed by understanding and shared with those who would help bear its weight. And in that transformation, there was finally peace.